Thanks for joining everybody today. Matt, what do you say we get started?
Yeah, I think
Go
we should
through?
crack straight into it. Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So we're going to go through, we always try to talk a little bit about what's happening in security from a good news perspective. So we'll share a little bit that we have there, go into some of the not so good news, danger zone, what's been happening from a threat perspective, and then some vulnerabilities that folks should watch out for. And then we'll open it up to some Q&A. We'll also have a couple of polls along the way. But first, let's get into the good news. Is there any good news? Well, actually, one interesting piece of news was that the breached hacking forum, which according to Bleeping Computer is the largest leak forum of its kind, has been shut down. This was kind of an interesting thing. It was apparently there was two kind of admins and one owner, and the owner, Pomporin, was arrested, apparently from New York. And he was a former member of another breach site called Raid Forums. But the other admin was named Baphomet, and he had left a CDN server up kind of as part of the infrastructure that wasn't used for very much, but he noticed somebody log into it. And I guess he thought that only he and Pompurin would be able to log into it. So he concluded that somebody had Pompurin's computer or credentials and that the entire outfit was compromised. So he decided to shut it all down, which I guess score one for the good news. Baphomet said that he'd be back essentially, and he left it open. He said he knows that they'll be replaced, but he's sort of challenging future breach sites that what he'll offer is going to be as good, and stay patient or so. I don't know. It seems like pretty good news to me though, Matt. What do you think?
Yeah, this isn't the first time that we've seen, not even just like law enforcement take something down, but the fear or retribution from law enforcement being the reason why an attacker shuts down their infrastructure. I think back to a lot of the ransomware gangs that we track who might preemptively, as we think, rebrand themselves in an effort to avoid arrest or being doxxed and kind of finding out who they are. But that's not the only good news that we've got. In the UK, a crime agency set up a fake distributed denial of service website for hire, meaning that if you actually went to try to transact, it would never be successful. But the idea being, I think the operation was called a part of something called Power Off, which is a global collective of law enforcement agencies attempting to take down the ease that it would be for an attacker to rent infrastructure to carry out an attack, right? So to use something like a DDoS for hire site, you don't even need to know how to carry out a denial of service attack. You can just pay money like a monthly subscription and then click the name of the domain you want to go after and really hit go. So a lot of the sophistication was removed, and that's what the target here from law enforcement is they stood up a fake site to gather information about attackers, and I think over, I want to say, a couple thousand attackers were able to do this. Now, this isn't the first time either. This is just the recent news. The FBI is actually known for this. They set up, I think it was called Anam, which was a encrypted chat messaging service a number of years ago in order to identify different hackers that wanted to use this encrypted messaging service. And they were able to collect, I think, somewhere around 30 million what the attackers thought were encrypted chat messages as it related to their hacking operations. As we talked about in our last episode, I predict we're going to see more collaboration from law enforcement and from government agencies doing a little more of what we might consider to be the offense, right? Like setting up, this is a bit of an entrapment ring to try to identify information about hackers. I think we're going to see more of this versus less of this moving forward.
Yeah, sort of. This is a sting operation, right? It's a kind of click here to do something illegal, right? It doesn't seem like it's that you should, if you're a cyber criminal, trust some of these sites. But
yeah, and if you're trying to do a pen test of your own environment, probably best not to use an advertised hacking tool and maybe hire an outfit to do some DDoS testing from you versus go out online. I know some of you in the chat might be thinking, well, someone could have good intentions here. Usually if you're seeking out this type of a website, it's to carry out a nefarious act as opposed to maybe a gray hat or a white hat hacker one.
Yeah, it makes sense. And speaking of hackers, maybe we should get into the danger zone. What do you say? I thought this story about the Bian Lian, I don't know if I'm saying that right, ransomware group was interesting because it sort of seems like an evolution of ransomware. You know, initially ransomware gangs would just go after the availability of data, and they would just, you know, basically encrypt everything and say you can't get it back unless you pay us. And then we started to see a double extortion technique where not only would they compromise the availability, but they would threaten to leak the information in kind of a double extortion, right? So threatening the confidentiality as well as the availability of the data. But this group really just focused on the confidentiality. They would say, listen, we've stolen a bunch of regulated data, and they'd kind of wield the threat of being fined for having that data breach over their victims. So, you know, pay us money or you're going to have to pay the regulators money. So I thought that was an interesting evolution in the way, kind of the monetary, you know, direction of this ransomware group. Pretty standard operation from how they do it technically, go-based backdoor, right? You know, remotely compromising the device, then, you know, doing their thing from a ransomware perspective.
And I wonder, do we even call this ransomware anymore? Is this extortware? You know, is this like a different? Yeah, I commonly associate ransomware with the encryption part. I'm okay with this broadened definition, but the shift in technique to why bother going for the encryption? Let's just go straight to we're going to post it online and you're going to face fines if you don't pay us. You know, is this a breed of ransomware that we could call extortware, or is it still the classic ransomware? I'd be curious to see what our audience says in the chat about that.
Well, there is software and there is ransom. So,
yeah,
you know,
one plus one can equal two. I could see it.
Maybe we could have a hybrid there. So this is one piece of danger zone. I think, you know, we have to include TikTok in our danger zone as well, right? A lot of talk about TikTok, and I guess, you know, they've been testifying, CEO of TikTok in front of Congress, and it seems like a lot of questions over a lot of aspects, you know, from children's mental health to, you know, what power does this application have over the people, you know, looking at the feed. There's some privacy concerns. There's just, and then also, you know, like some of the responses I think elicit some of the sovereignty stuff. Like, is basically one of the things is like, hey, this is a U.S. company and the U.S. data is kept on U.S. soil. So Matt, what do you?
I don't know if that really, yeah, I don't. In terms of like the question around data sovereignty, right? I'm not sure how much that matters, if other than, you know, which law enforcement agencies I could willingly cooperate with versus which law enforcement agencies do I have no choice but to cooperate with. Like when we think about like the powers of the Patriot Act when it comes to digital evidence and things like that. The angle I'm always trying to get people to think about is like, you know, you in your company are obviously might be permitting or not permitting corporate devices to have TikTok on them. And then the risks and dangers associated with that. And then we all have to make the personal choices, like with our families and even with our children around like the content that they see online. I think TikTok just brings it all together. It brings it all to a head, right? They're clearly taking a ton of data in order to deliver the functionality in their app, maybe more than they need. And whether or not we are okay with this trend in big tech to take all the data and share all the data really without a net benefit other than the usage of the app. I think that's where consumers are now starting to face these decisions, and Congress is trying to bring these decisions to a head is should this be okay or not? The other angle that I'm always looking for and trying to encourage people to talk about is really the danger of the data being shared is one thing, but I think we learned from Facebook and Cambridge Analytica and all of the fallout from that's happening. I think the other thing is that content could be presented to you that could incite a response from you. And is that content governed by a foreign state actor or not? That's the core question, and I think where the core risk comes from. You know, imagine if everybody got displayed the same content that might incite certain behaviors from people, maybe like some sort of economic, like a fire sale or some sort of revolution type of an event. If that started as a misinformation or what we would call a psyops campaign, a psychological warfare campaign, I think TikTok would be a tool that could be used by a bad actor to execute psychological warfare.
Yeah, I think, we've definitely seen that. It's I'm reminded of Littlefinger from Game of Thrones. I like to play a little game. What is the worst possible motivation that somebody has for doing something? And I think it's kind of fair to ask that of all sides, right? What is the worst case scenario that we could have with having this massive content machine controlled by a government? And what could happen there, right? So anyway, big issues here. I think it's time for a poll from our audience.
Yeah, I think we should see where the viewers are around kind of like what your organization thinks about TikTok, where you think the danger or the risk is, and really, kind of if you guys have even taken any steps around that. If there's any other comments you guys want to give us once you've answered the poll in the chat, we were taking a look at it and trying to read those now.
Yeah, and it's interesting, kind of the undercurrent of fear, kind of fear of the unknown as we answer this, and that's going to come back. I think there's another big topic here that we're going to talk about where there's a lot of unknown and a lot of fear happening. So I'm curious to see what people think is the most dangerous aspect of TikTok.
Yeah, I think we've got it now. So it seems like everybody thinks that it's a combination, but there seems to be some competing priorities around either just like data privacy and kind of violating data privacy laws, as well as as I talked about, really where I personally see the most danger is in around like state-sponsored information and misinformation campaigns.
Yeah, this is interesting. Great comments here too. I think, are we talking about the symptoms or the underlying problem? And chasing the threats here.
And really, it seems like not a whole lot of our audience uses TikTok, and more of our audience than not doesn't has some sort of policy to restrict the use of TikTok on work devices. I'm pretty surprised by that. About 60% of our audience has some sort of policy in place to limit the use of TikTok on corporate devices.
Maybe we should add another poll question for where do you get your funny cat videos, if not TikTok?
I would say Reddit personally, but I mean, are we just trading one social media app for another at that point?
Yeah, definitely. All right. Well, so there's another story in the danger zone, which is as dangerous as it gets, I think. And this is from a report on Mandiant, which is tracking some of the 0 days that were used. Apparently last year there were 55 0 days that were tracked, which was a little bit down from the year before, but significantly higher. It really does seem like either there are fewer 0 days this past year, but more likely people are getting better at hiding them because cyber is the new battleground, right? And these 0 day vulnerabilities are pretty heavy weapons, right? So I think it looks like there's some kind of no surprises here. Some financially motivated threat actors, some state actors, China, and then going after products that people use, right? From Microsoft, from Google, from Apple. I guess any surprises here for you, Matt?
In some ways, this is business as usual. I think, it's a cat and mouse game. We've got security researchers trying to find these 0 days, but those researchers might not be as well funded as nation state adversaries that are also trying to identify 0 days. The main difference being that a ethical security researcher is going to share it with the community that's where their incentive lies, or maybe even through like a bug bounty, like a bug crowd or a bug bounty from a particular organization. And then on the other end of the spectrum, a state-sponsored actor, it's in their best interest to not tell anyone, to sit on that 0 day as long as possible and use it to, gain access to information or manipulate information for, state goals. And I think that's business as usual. I mean, when we talk about like the state-sponsored cyber attacks from China, this is the playbook of Chinese state-sponsored actors is, get in, even if potentially at the hardware level with 0 day vulnerabilities or even embedding bad code from the factory as a means to carry out an intrusion.
It definitely seems like part of our lives now. And I guess that leads us into our next segment, which is vulnerabilities. And I think one of the, speaking of China and 0 days and vulnerabilities, there was an interesting story here in the Wall Street Journal about kind of these 0 days on edge devices, firewalls, I guess, remote access servers, as well as virtual machine concentrators. But I was reminded by kind of the playbook that we saw with Proxy Shell, which is a vulnerable edge connected device. And these, I guess this story, what I think was a little bit spooky, but we should unpack a little bit, is just that the stealth, right? Some of the careful use of these 0 days that are going to make it hard for folks to detect when they're being exploited, and then hard to react, hard to get ahead of these things.
And I think we could draw a parallel here to how different that is from SolarWinds, right? We all remember December in 2020. If you guys don't remember, David and I were talking about it with everybody. The Varonis system actually detected that novel 0 day attack. Not the focus of today's session, but that was a very widespread attack. It was clear that thousands and thousands of organizations were having that actions on objectives phase of the attack all at the same time. The attackers unleashed the sort of the power that they had established from that 0 day attack. You have to compare that to if the playbook instead was use a 0 day to get in, but do as much as humanly possible to avoid second stage detection, so that someone would truly have to identify the 0 day in order to identify the presence of attackers. It's a different playbook. Something, again, John, think about like Proxy Shell. That was something that was extremely widespread, but did come from, started from identifying kind of the post-mortem of a nation state, the state-sponsored attack. And I think even the researchers revealed that attack they suspected to have started months and months ago. So who knows how long that 0 day was sitting on the shelf for the attackers before a security research firm got an incident that was able to get them to identify that was the original source of the attack, and then shared it with the rest of the world for us even still to this day to find attacks that use Proxy Shell as the initial access vector.
Yeah, and I think, we're going to talk a little bit about whether folks should despair or whether this is kind of the way we've been thinking about it already. But before we do that, I think we ought to ask our audience what they think about these kinds of threats.
And the thing that I'm really curious about for all of our listeners is this, when you think about APTs and state-sponsored attacks like China, and what your risk assessment reveals, like where you think the risk is this the top threat for your org? Is it in the top 5? Is it in the top 10? Or, and I think this is an okay answer depending on your risk posture, are you not worried about, state-sponsored actors or APTs at all?
Yeah, I'm curious what where this falls in people's thinking, in their policies. Can we see those results?
Yeah, I think and I think back to like past experiences even before I got to Varonis. I think for me it was definitely a top 5 threat whether I was in work in government or in the private sector. The idea that a state-sponsored actor would have the motivation to attack my organization, it was absolutely up there. But I actually would probably concur, with our audience here. The top threat for most organizations, just blanket statement, is probably cybercrime or insiders. likely that state-sponsored attacks, at least as far as we know today, aren't as common as a ransomware or a phishing cyclone attack. A fiscally motivated, low sophistication attacker seems to be the much more prevalent attack. It does seem like our audience agrees, though most people are feeling like it's a pretty top concern.
Yeah, I definitely feel like this is elevated over the past few years. And I think it's also interesting how the cybercrime or the state-sponsored techniques quickly spill out into the cyber world, right? That there's just not as much lead time as I think there used to be.
Yeah, and to shout out just a comment I just read in the chat where someone was saying that for a utility company, state-sponsored might be number one. And I would tend to agree with you. Critical infrastructure providers, and I mean the U.S. government certainly agrees with this, should be concerned about state-sponsored attacks because of the impact it could have on the economy, on the general use of electricity, water, cell phones, internet. And I think this brings up the point though of I realize even though Mandiant was the one that released this 55 0 days report, I think back to the APT1 report. I was at like 2010, 2011, I don't even remember, 2008, where they came out and said that China and state-sponsored attacks from China were aligned to the 5-year plan, and nation-state attacks from China are something that everyone should be concerned about. I don't know that anything's changed since the APT1 report. If anything, state-sponsored actors are more well-funded, are better staffed, and it's more of a focus of states, including the United States, to have where David and I sit, to have state-sponsored hackers on the payroll, to have offensive and defensive cyber capabilities is even bigger than it was a long time ago. But I still think that not much has changed. I mean, China is still one of the looming threats and one of the most powerful state-sponsored hacker groups that's out there.
Well, Matt, you may ask yourself, how do I stop this? Or what should I do differently?
Yeah, do we have some kind of practical advice for our audience around dealing with APTs? I think the first thing that comes to mind for me to just jump on the bandwagon of zero trust is the reason that zero trust is so popular, okay? It's actually because that is one of the lines of defense against a state-sponsored 0 day. Like, let's say one of your edge devices, like the ones we're talking about, a firewall, a remote access gateway, gets compromised. If you've implemented zero trust on that, there's a really, really high likelihood that you're going to be able to detect that before it gets to what likely is that really juicy center, which is your data. That same concept, if you think about security from like an inside out or a data first approach, and you put those protections in around the critical assets that you're trying to protect the most, you put the highest level of monitoring and the most control there, you're again going to have a really high likelihood of being able to detect that. But if most of your security controls exist away from the assets that you're trying to protect, you're not as well instrumented for an APT as you might think that you are. And so I would really challenge everyone to, first of all, go through that risk assessment, figure out, well, what is it that again, and for utility providers, which our audience seems to be really excited about, focus on keeping the utilities running and implement your risk control measures there. And for a lot of organizations, a lot of that could be buried in your data, and make sure that the stuff that a state actor would want or they would want to do to you is where you spend the most of your time and apply the most of your protections.
Yeah, I think it's kind of a normal practice, right? You have to assume that there are many vectors that anybody could get in your firewall. You can't assume that somebody can't go right through it, so putting those layers behind what could be breached, it's a way to keep the water flowing, right? So I think one sense of unknowns and fear that I mentioned is from all these 0 days, but it is, I think, very similar to what it's been. Another big kind of unknown new thing is, and we've talked about it on the show, is ChatGPT, and there was a security breach, actually a couple of them, that was related to ChatGPT. So I actually asked ChatGPT to summarize the security breach that happened. And really, what it looks like happened is that somebody was able to get a Chrome extension into the Chrome App Store that was masquerading as a benign interface into the ChatGPT API, but it not only would allow you a connection, it would actually scrape credentials out of your browser, hijack your Facebook account, then use access to your Facebook account to set up an ad to promote the Chrome extension to kind of keep the cycle going, right? So it is, and by the way, for those that don't know, ChatGPT is an AI, and you can basically ask it anything, and it's pretty crazy. It will even answer in Klingon if you want. It's pretty nuts in terms of all the things it can do. But this, so many people are using this. I think it's pretty natural. People would want a Chrome extension for this.
I also think it's natural they'd want malware for this.
Yeah. And so anyway, I thought this was a pretty crazy, like story, and potentially, I think, a sign of new stuff to come, and a new kind of conversation around ChatGPT. It was followed with an actual breach of the ChatGPT database. It's the at least the subscriber information. There's a free option for ChatGPT, and there's a paid option for ChatGPT. And apparently, ChatGPT uses Redis, which I think is a NoSQL in-memory database or something. Somebody can correct me if I'm wrong on that. But apparently, it uses a Python library, and it's an open source Python library that there was a bug in it that was able to be exploited, and then attackers were able to siphon off subscriber information, payment information, email addresses, contact stuff like that as well. So this is kind of a new, as more and more people use this and put data there, of course, it becomes a target in and of itself, right?
I think, think about it even in more basic sense. It's new tech, right? New tech's going to bring new risks. New tech's going to bring new vulnerabilities. New tech's going to bring new sources to attack, to carry out, an attack vector. It's almost like, mobile phones or the cloud. AI and the power and the dangers of AI is something that everyone seems to be talking about, right?
Yep. And actually, you remind me. Speaking of new tech, right? They've kind of released a container, a Docker image, I guess, to help folks integrate plugins into API with different, different software, right? Different ways to integrate it, and that had a vulnerability too, right? So with any new tech, right, there's all sorts of new stuff that we're learning. And people looking to exploit the new tech. And I think, when I mentioned the fear, this story, where folks are saying, hey, we need to pause. This is getting too scary. We've got some big figures in tech saying, let's kind of put the brakes on this. That was interesting too.
Isn't there a movie series featuring Arnold Schwarzenegger about sort of the worst possible outcome here?
I let me ask Siri about that. Yeah, I think there was. You kind of wonder though. I mean, are people really getting? Are people? I guess I'm curious what people think in the chat. Whether this is kind of an overreaction to ChatGPT.
Yeah, are we on the road to Skynet with ChatGPT and GPT-4 and kind of the adoption of AI? Is it time to pause? What do you guys think? And this isn't a poll question. We really just want to read your thoughts in the chat.
Yeah, great point, Nancy. I mean, it's a little bit like, slowing when Pandora's box is opened. It's like, it's really hard to put the genie back in the bottle, to mix my metaphors. It's kind of like, what are the buggy whip people going to do now that we've got cars? it's really hard to stop that.
And I think to Kent, to your point, I don't know that we can just burn it down. I think we're a little bit past that. I think we could probably wrap things up. A big shout out to you, David. I'll love doing the show with you, and to our audience. Really appreciate your guys' attendance, and we hope you tune in for our next episode of State of Cybercrime.
Thanks so much, everybody. Thanks, Matt.